Thanks for tuning into the No Huddle Show. On today's episode, it's just me, Elliot. I'm doing the AMA. I'm answering all your guys' Eagles questions. I touched on a bunch of different topics, from everything from, why I think the Eagles are going to throw the ball more to their running backs this year, what's going on at cornerback with Rasul Douglas, even the 2019 NFL Draft. Then I talked about, what I like on my cheesesteak, how I got to where I am in the sports journalism world, and what my favorite characters are on The Office. So really a bunch of different topics, but as always, I wanted to start by saying, if you're listening on YouTube, we really appreciate it. Toss us that thumbs up. But if everyone could go subscribe to the podcast on all your podcast apps. We're on Apple now. We're on Spotify, Spreaker, Google Play. We are everywhere now, officially. So go look us up, The No Huddle Show. Hit subscribe. And when you do, leave us a review. Ideally 5 stars. Leave us a review and a question, and we will answer it. I read every single review that's left, even the negative ones. So go leave us that review. Give us that 5 stars. And let us know how we're doing, especially on this one because it's just me. So we'll get this rolling. The No Huddle Show, just me, answering all Eagles questions with training camp right around the corner. What's going on, everybody? Elliot Shorr-Parks here. New episode of the No Huddle Show. We're doing something a little different today. I'm riding solo. No Zach. Zach's out getting stories, getting ready for training camp. And I'm going to do today, I guess you call it an AMA podcast. You can ask me anything. I take questions on Twitter. I ask for questions in the comment section. And it's something I've been wanting to do for a while now. But with training camp coming, I thought it'd be a good time to kind of do it for the first time. I'll answer questions, talk about some stuff that's on my mind. And if you guys like it, we'll keep doing it throughout the season. And I think it'll be fun. It'll give me a chance to kind of expand on things that I say on Twitter. I won't have that 280 character limit. But as you guys know, I love to interact with you guys. So I definitely still want to answer the questions you have, but, more expansive than I'm able to on Twitter. So before we get started, though, I've been reading this book this offseason, and I wanted to tell you guys about it. So it's the Warren Sharpe 2018 football preview, and they're not a sponsor or anything. I would just highly recommend, if you're listening to this podcast, that you should read it, because I've been spending the last week or so reading it, and I'm learning a ton, not only just about the NFL, but different things about the Eagles I didn't know, division opponents. So it's been extremely educational. But one point that I really took away from this that I want to talk about for a little bit before we get into the questions is, I'm convinced that the Eagles are going to throw the ball to their running backs more in 2018 than they did in 2017. I just think that looking at the trends of the league, the way the Eagles use their running backs, I think it's going to be a big year for them, and here's why. So one of the points that Warren Sharpe makes in his book is the Eagles are one of the most analytical teams in the NFL. That when you look at what the teams, like the Patriots, who are maybe at the forefront of the league in terms of their use of analytics in football, when you look at teams like that, even Andy Reid is up there. The things they do a lot, the Eagles are also doing, and you can see Doug Peterson do that with his play calling, and you really saw it in 2017 more than you did in 2016. One of the ways Doug showed it was, teams that, follow analytics, they throw the ball on 2nd and 10 more than they run it. Now, a lot of teams think, all right, it's 2nd and 10. If I throw it to incompletion, all of a sudden I'm sitting in 3rd and 10. No, you're better off throwing the ball and, trying to get 7-8 yards than you are running it, only ending up with 1 or 2 potentially, and then you're still in 3rd and long. So that's just an example of, traditional thinking in the NFL would say you throw the ball on 2nd and 10. Doug's a guy that he's been throwing the ball. Doug, look, I'm messing up. Traditional thinking in the NFL says that on 2nd and 10, you run the ball so you can get some yards and you don't get stuck in 3rd and long. Doug last year threw the ball more than he did in 2016, a sign that he is following analytics and he's kind of beginning to follow the trends of the NFL. Doug isn't just a good play caller because of what he does on 4th down. This book has really taught me that, just all of the analytics Doug uses really does help. But the one thing that I think is going to lead the Eagles to throw the ball more is a couple of things. So first, the Eagles targeted wide receivers on 60% of the time on early downs last year. So 1st and 2nd down, when they threw the ball, 60% of the time it was to a wide receiver. So that was slightly above the NFL average of 56%. And what's interesting about that is that targeting wide receivers was actually one of the least efficient targets of the two compared to running backs. So teams that were targeting the running backs early on in the down, so before third down when you're still on first and second, teams that target running backs early have more success than those teams that were targeting wide receivers, which I thought was pretty interesting. So the Eagles actually only targeted their running backs on 15% of the early downs in the NFL last season, and that was actually lower than 2016, so they took a step back. But if you look traditionally at the NFL, more teams are starting to throw the ball to the running backs more, and they're starting to do it earlier on in down. So this is an analytical trend that the Eagles are behind on right now, which is confusing because when you look at everything else they do, the way they manage the cap, the way they Doug calls games and uses analytics to do that and to game plan, they're really one of the top analytical teams in the league besides this one glaring weakness, which is they're not throwing the ball to their running backs a ton. And what's interesting is when they did do it last year, the Eagles averaged more yards per attempt throwing to the running backs on an earlier down than they did their receivers. So they averaged almost 7 yards per attempt when they targeted a running back on first and second down, compared to just around 6.5 yards for a receiver. So you figure last year they had more success throwing to a running back, which is an easier pass, than they did the receiver early on. So you add everything up and you say, okay, they're having success throwing the ball to running backs. Didn't do it as much last year, so you're going to want to change things up, adjust. I think they're going to throw it more to kind of switch the offense up. And you add the fact that, it's where the game is trending, and the Eagles are behind that, which is unlike them. I think the Eagles, in terms of play calling, are going to throw the ball to their running backs a lot more next year than they did. And I think the roster speaks to it too. I mean, they brought back Darren Sproles, who is a deceivingly good running back between the tackles, but is also not a huge guy. He's not going to be your workhorse running back. He's more of a receiver. So I think, that's one sign. Jay Ajayi is not a great receiver out of the backfield, but the Eagles did a decent job last year with him, getting him the ball in space, on those screen passes. I think he averaged like 8 or 9 yards of reception with the Eagles, which is pretty good considering, he came in midway through the season. Corey Clement was Eagles' best running back last year catching the ball. They averaged almost 7.5 yards per attempt last season, which was the best on the team among the running backs. And you saw in the Super Bowl what happened when they really tried to get Clement involved in the passing game. He ripped the Patriots up. They were unable to cover him, which is ironic because coming out of Wisconsin, he was kind of viewed as more of a workhorse back, not really a receiving running back. But he has great hands. Deuce Staley loves him. They trust him a ton. So I think you'll see him get a ton of targets this year. But then finally, I think this leads me to Donnell Pumphrey, a guy that everybody's kind of written off, he had a bad training camp last year. I think it's kind of almost become a legend, like legendary how bad he was. He wasn't as bad as fans make him out to be. He was not great in the preseason games, but in training camp he wasn't bad. And this offseason, he's looked really good catching the ball. Now, running back is a position where if they don't have pads on and it's not a game, it's really hard to tell how much improvement you've made. And I'm always a little cautious of buying into coach speak when they talk about how, guys really improved this offseason. I mean, I think that's easy for a coach to say. But with Pumphrey, it's not, my BS radar it isn't up on this one. I think the way that Deuce talks about Pumphrey in terms of how he's matured as a running back, how he's learning more to get in the film room, how he's put on muscle. I think just the things you're hearing about Pumphrey, this isn't like a fifth-year guy where you're hearing, he's just going to be better. Pumphrey seems to have taken those steps that rookies have to take from their first to second year, especially if they've struggled. But one thing Pumphrey's always been able to do is catch the ball. And if you put him in space, and I think Doug Peterson's one of the best coaches in the NFL at taking his players and putting them in the position to succeed. He knows how to game plan for his players' talents. He doesn't ask them to do things they're not capable of. So I think Pumphrey's a guy that if they can trust him to be on the field a little more, I think roster-wise he has a decent shot of making it when you look at the other running backs. And he does show some maturity and improvement from last year. He does have the ability to catch the ball. So I think Pumphrey could be in for a pretty big year when you combine the fact that I think the Eagles are going to throw the ball more than they did last year. So just one of my opinions from reading that book. I'm going to be writing a bunch of different stuff out of it. But I would definitely check it out. Like I said, Warren Sharpe's 2018 NFL preview. I learned a lot, and I really think you guys will too. All right, so let's get into some of these questions. I want to switch it up a little, do some football, some kind of, off the field, fun stuff, just kind of keep it light. All right, so one of the first ones is I will stick with football for this one, and this is from Cortez or at the Jigger, so there we go. What are the chances of Jones at running back and Rasul at safety? So Jones, I'm not as sure or as high on as other people are on him. I mean, I know he's coming off of, at times he looked good. He looked good with the Redskins. He certainly had some good games against the Eagles. But when you look at the running back position, you have Darren Sproles, who's going to make the team, Jay Ajayi, who's going to make the team, Corey Clement, who's going to make the team, and I just said I think Pumphrey will. So that's 4 right there. So then you kind of go to, all right, you have Wendell Smallwood, you have Josh Adams, the rookie out of Notre Dame, and you have Matt Jones. And those 3 guys are going to be fighting for one spot or maybe no spots. I mean, they kept 5 last year, but they had more of a reason to. So let's say the Eagles go with 5 this year. Wendell Smallwood, everyone counts him out, and I think that's probably fair to do, but he is a dependable option. The Eagles know what they're going to get out of him. He can return kicks. So, I wouldn't completely count him out yet. I think he's probably the leader in the clubhouse for that last role. Josh Adams, so he's going to be ready for the start of training camp, which is good, but I think he has IR written all over him this year as a guy that they can develop for a year and then bring in. When they signed him as an undrafted free agent, I said I thought he would make the roster, and I do still think he'll be in the building, but the fact he missed all offseason with that foot injury is just not great, especially for a rookie. So that's where you have, and then when you get to Matt Jones, he's like a weird combination of kind of a veteran because he has experience in the league, but new to the team and actually hasn't been that great when he has played consistently. He's had a bit of a fumbling issue, so I don't think he stands a great shot at making the team. Rasul at safety, Rasul Douglas, I don't see that happening either. Maybe occasionally taking some snaps in a Corey Graham type role, but I think the Eagles just like him as an outside guy. He's big, he's physical. You saw last year against guys like Brandon Marshall what he can do. Played very well against Carolina, teams that at the time had kind of bigger receivers. And I think they like him, potentially match up against tight ends. And he has something that the other Eagles cornerbacks don't have, which is size. He's physical and he's got long arms. So I think the Eagles like him at corner. I'm not saying he'd never move to safety. As I've said on this podcast before, teams coming out of West Virginia, some teams did like him as a safety, and they thought he projected better to safety than he did at corner. But the Eagles do like him as a corner, so I think they'll keep him there. All right, let's get another one here. Stick with another footballer here. Les Corsos says Andrew Luck needs 6 more weeks, and Colts offer a 2nd-round pick. Let's presume it's in the 35 to 45-ish round number for Foles. So do you do it? So he's saying in a world where Andrew Luck needs more time, and I don't think that's crazy considering he didn't play at all last year, and the Colts offer you a 2nd-round pick for Foles, what do you do? So this is obviously a loaded question that people have asked a ton all offseason. Well, the Colts make some sense because they have Frank Reich as their head coach, who obviously was Foles' offensive coordinator last year with the Eagles. So the Colts are a good team in that regard, and Foles is basically out of contract after this year, so they could give up a 2nd-round pick, still be invested in Luck, but have a chance to compete this year. 33 to 45-ish, it's tough because the Eagles are going to have 3 picks in the first 2 rounds next year. They have their own first, they have their own second, and they have the Ravens second. So, yeah, obviously you always love to have more picks, but the Eagles aren't in a position like this year where they need picks. I mean, the Eagles could have as many as 11 picks next year when you take into account compensatory picks. So I do think that would play a role. Second, the Eagles appear very serious about wanting to repeat, and that sounds simple to say, but some teams win the Super Bowl and they kind of they start to build. They start to take the future into account a little more because they just won one. The Eagles seem like they're 100% serious about being one of, I think, only 8 teams to ever repeat a Super Bowl champion. So I do think having Foles on the roster offers more value to them than the 2nd-round pick. That being said, I really like Nate Sudfeld. I know they do too. He obviously doesn't have the Super Bowl experience Foles does. I mean, almost no backup quarterback does. But I think that they'd feel confident with him going in. I think if you get to the 4th week of training camp, Wentz is going to play. Sudfeld's played really well. Foles says he would want to go to the Colts. I do think I would pull the trigger on that type of trade. Also just because I think it might be good to get Foles out of the building for Carson. Not that they don't get along, but, look, you just saw this week that the top selling jersey in the NFL over, I think it was like the last few months, is Foles. Wentz is 3. Is Foles more popular in Philly than Wentz right now? I think you can make the debate he is. If Carson comes out and struggles, then I think you would hear some people saying they want Foles to go in. So I don't think it would be the worst thing in the world if the Eagles and Foles peacefully parted ways, where the Eagles got something, Foles got a chance to go start at a place he wants, and you never let it get to that ugly point. So I think if I get to the 4th week, Sudfeld looks good, Wentz looks good, I do think I would pull the trigger on a deal where you get the 35 to 45th-ish pick overall. There. So, all right, maybe we'll do a non-football one now. All right, so this is a good one here. I've gotten a lot of flack on Twitter for my cheesesteak take. So, Mikhail Ice tweets, "What goes on a cheesesteak for you? Only accepting correct answers." Well, the good news is I only give correct answers. That's the only one you'll get. I like mayo on my cheesesteak. It is what it is. I like mayo. I go with the ketchup, the mayo, salt, pepper, fried onions. I think it's the best. It's the best cheesesteak. And what's funny is I tweeted it, and man, people were not happy. Apparently, mayo is not an acceptable thing here in Philly when it comes to cheesesteaks. I'll also say I think the best cheesesteak in Philly is D'Alessandro's. I think out in Roxborough, it's better than all kind of the traditional places that are more tourist attractions at this point. The only thing I don't like about D'Alessandro's is I wish that their cheesesteaks were a little bigger, but I think they have the best cheesesteak in Philly. And yes, I proudly will say that I put mayo on my cheesesteak. Here's another good one from Hingle McCringleberry, and me reading these Twitter names sounds ridiculous, but all right. Who is your favorite character on The Office? And it's funny he asked that because I've been binge watching The Office like crazy this offseason. I've already seen them, but honestly, I think it's the best show to rewatch. Watch it when I'm falling asleep. Watch it when I'm, put it on in the background. I think it might be my favorite show of all time. And I know some people are going to be like, oh, it's not an HBO show. It's not a Showtime show. I think The Office, in terms of just being enjoyable, how funny it is, rewatchability, might be my favorite show of all time. Now, my favorite character. That's a tough one. The easy answer is Michael, because the show, I don't want to give any spoilers away, but let's just say the show is much better with him on it than in the episodes when he's not. But I think that's kind of a basic answer, and that's not really my style on Twitter. Gotta keep it 100. So I think my three favorite characters are Ryan, underrated character, very funny later on. Gets off to a bit of a slow start, but when he goes and works for corporate and then he comes back, and him dating Kelly, I think I'm Team Ryan and Kelly over Jim and Pam all the way. So I'm gonna go Ryan. I think Kelly is really funny, and I really think Kevin is funny. Later on, he becomes a bit of a caricature of himself, but in the middle seasons, I think he's hysterical. So I would probably say, Ryan, Kelly, and Kevin. All right, let's get back to football here. This is a question I feel not enough people are talking about, but it's kind of one of the biggest deals on this team right now. And that is, this is from Wedge20. Will Jordan Hicks ever make it through a season healthy? It's so crazy to me because at this time last year, one of the biggest things with this team financially was the fact that Jordan Hicks was going to get paid soon. I mean, 2016 season, Jordan Hicks was not just one of the best young linebackers in the NFL, he was one of the best linebackers, period. I mean, the guy's a playmaker. He's good in coverage, gets his hands on a ton of footballs, always tipping passes, always causing fumbles, recovering them, tackle machine, great against the run, team leader, really good at, getting the defense set. I mean, Jordan Hicks, when healthy, is an absolute stud at linebacker. But as this guy says, been in the NFL 3 seasons now. 2 of them he's ended on IR, and he's really only stayed healthy for 1 season. So, being a 3rd-round pick, he's entering the 4th year of his deal, which is the last year of his deal, which means this next offseason, Jordan Hicks is going to be a free agent. And it'll be really interesting to see 2 things. One, if the Eagles decide to re-sign him, like when they would do that. I mean, if it's week 11 and he's played outstanding, he's 2016 Jordan Hicks, he looks healthy, like, do you sign him then to kind of maybe get a little more value? Or do you wait until then to make him prove he's healthy? And then if he does hit the open market, what do other teams value him like? Because that would still only be 2 out of 4 seasons where he stayed healthy and serious injuries. I mean, serious leg injury last year, had the shoulder injury in 2015, I guess it was. Serious injuries here. Had the injury history at Texas when he was in college. You saw Nigel Bradham get a 5-year, $40 million deal with not a ton of guarantees. I think the Eagles would want to bring Hicks back, leader in the locker room, really close with Wentz, plays well with Bradham, a guy they really like to kind of put out there in their community events, a guy that they can, really be proud of saying is a part of the organization. But it's a risk. So I think, predicting the guy's going to stay healthy, there's no point in doing that. Obviously, history's not on his side. I think the fact it's a contract year, Hicks is really going to be motivated to make sure he plays 16 games. So I think what the Eagles do with Hicks going forward is one of the most interesting things around this team. All right. At MD Savage 63, a little more of a regular Twitter name there. Don't sound as ridiculous saying it. Simple question: Matt Collins or Mike Wallace? I'll answer this 2 ways. My opinion and the Eagles' opinion. The Eagles have made it clear where their opinion is, and their team Mike Wallace. I mean, they had the opportunity to make Matt Collins a starting receiver opposite Alshon Jeffrey this offseason. They hired his old receiver coach from UNC. He got, a fair amount of snaps last year. Not a ton, but enough where you could say, all right, he saw game action. Had the 63-yard touchdown catch against the Redskins. Had a really good training camp last year. Selling Matt Collins as a starting receiver would have been an easy sell for the fan base. Instead, they bring in Mike Wallace at a fairly decent sum. I feel like it was around $4 million with incentives. So, not a small amount of money compared to, the idea that they were going to pay Matt Collins like $600,000. So they invested money in Mike Wallace. He got all the reps as a starting receiver this offseason when he was there. Matt Collins was only on the field because Alshon wasn't. The Eagles made it very clear to the practices we got to see that the 3 receivers on this team are going to be Alshon, Aguilar, and Wallace. Now, injuries happen, things like that, but the Eagles seem pretty clear that they like Mike Wallace. And I agree. I'm not as big on Matt Collins as other people are. I know fans love him because of last year, but to me, I just see a guy. I don't see elite skills from him yet. You look at what he does in training camp sometimes, and, he makes a catch and everyone sees it, but he goes long stretches without making a catch. And then last year, Torrey Smith was not playing that great, and Hollins wasn't able to overtake him for that starting job. And when the Eagles knew they were moving on from Smith, Hollins winning that job from Smith midway through last year would have been a good thing for the Eagles. So I'm not as big on Matt Collins as other people are. I don't think the Eagles are either. And I think that he is, Mike Wallace is going to be the starting receiver. I think he's going to be an upgrade over Smith. He's better than Hollins, and he is going to play a fair amount. All right, should I answer the cornerback question that has been answered 800,000 times this offseason? No, not talking about the nickel corner anymore. We will see what happens. Everyone's guessing at this point, and I think it's a big storyline, but it's something that's been discussed to death. All right, here's an interesting one. Chandler Jackson asks, do you see the Eagles making Joe Douglas the GM and keeping Howie as vice president? Now, the reason this is interesting is because the Eagles already blocked Joe Douglas once this previous, earlier this offseason from interviewing with the Houston Texans. And as much as I will always say I was wrong about Howie, and he certainly deserves credit for what he's done, 100%, there's no denying the fact that the Eagles' scouting department and their ability to hit on free agents improved once Joe Douglas got here. I mean, Howie's track record prior to Joe Douglas, signing free agents with draft picks is sketchy at best. So, I'm not taking a ton of credit away from Howie, but, Howie has said how important Joe Douglas is, and the scouting department is very important. So I think the Eagles losing Joe Douglas would be a big loss. Now, the question is, would Howie be willing to kind of call Joe Douglas the GM? You give Howie a different name, even though he doesn't actually have the title of GM, but, would Howie be willing to not be the top decision maker? That answer is no. I mean, Howie's a guy that's already had his power taken away once from Chip Kelly. He is very, very competitive. He loves and wants to make sure he gets credit for things. He's seen his name kind of dragged through the mud before when Chip fired him. He's, been viewed as a guy that can't win in the NFL. And now that he has the power, now that he, has built this team that's along with Joe Douglas, able to, defend a Super Bowl championship, I don't think Howie would willingly give that power up. Now, 8 years down the line maybe, but you're not going to be able to keep Joe Douglas for 8 years. So, yeah, I don't think that's going to be happening. I think Joe Douglas is out the door next year, assuming the Eagles have the same type of season. But, I don't think that's going to happen. All right. What cities – all right, Robert Whitley, but at Buddy Lee R. What cities on the road have the best food? In case you heard my cheesesteak take, you might already think I have bad taste in food. You're going to hate this answer too. I'm just like a normal guy on the road. I'm not a big steakhouse guy. Whenever I go out to the other writers, they make fun of me because I just order Chinese and eat it in my room. And then go out maybe later. But I'm not a huge foodie. So, I've been to great cities, San Francisco, Los Angeles. This year, it's going to be amazing. London, Nashville, New Orleans. So maybe I'll get out a little there, but I'm not a huge foodie in that regard. Okay, here's a good one. At Cashing Dogs, Joey Betts. What's the latest on Tim Jernigan? So Jernigan has not spoken since he suffered a back injury earlier this offseason. Clearly, back injury the Eagles weren't happy about since they tore up his deal and made him sign a restructured one with almost no guaranteed money. It's interesting with Jernigan. I think we talked about this on the last podcast with Zach, but everyone's kind of just assumed that he's not going to play in week 1, and because of that, he's going to be put on the PUP, physically unable to perform list. But I don't think he's going to end up on the PUP, or at least I'm not ready to say he is. I mean, I remember last year when Bo Allen suffered his pectoral injury, everyone said, "Oh, he'll be on the PUP. He'll be on the PUP." He played week 1. So will Jernigan play week 1? I don't know. All injuries are different, but man, losing Jernigan for 6 weeks, which you do if he's on the PUP, that's going to be tough. And I don't think the Eagles have enough players they love at defensive tackle where they're going to say, okay, well, maybe Jernigan's out the first 3 weeks, but we can't, I don't want to afford losing him for all 6. So maybe they go light at defensive tackle while Jernigan's just inactive. They roll Michael Bennett in there a little. Brandon Graham's taking some snaps in there. We'll see. They have very versatile defensive linemen. So the latest, I don't think he plays in preseason. I don't think he'll be out there at the start of training camp. But I would not rule out week 1. And I would just be a little surprised if he ends on the PUP, especially with how much he needs to play this year because of his new contract status. All right. Here's another one here. Okay, this is a good one. At Royal Cougar 5. A little bit off topic, but early 2019 draft needs. Thing to keep in mind while I watch the NCAA. First of all, it's never too early. I love discussing these type of hypotheticals. You know that if you follow me on Twitter. So what are some early 2019 draft needs? Well, the obvious ones here are along the lines. Offensive line, defensive line. Offensively, they have maybe the best offensive line in the NFL, but they're old. You have your backup at Vitae at tackle. You have Johnson, so you're kind of set there. But, at guard, how long are you going to really be with Wisniewski? You need kind of backups here. Like Sayamalu's not really panning out. He's a versatile guy, but it's not really panning out in terms of his actual ability to get on the field. So you might need a Sayamalu replacement. Jason Kelce, how many years does he have left? 3, 4? I mean, he's an undersized guy at center. People have written Jason Kelce off before. I didn't, but, people should be wary of just completely writing him off in 3 years. But realistically, I think the Eagles need some real actual prospects to develop along the offensive line. Their backup situation is not filled with guys. I mean, Matt Pryor, maybe. He looked good, I thought, in OTAs, but you're still talking about a 5th or 6th round pick there. I think the Eagles, one of their priorities should be tackle early on with one of those first 3 picks they have in the first 2 rounds. Another need for 2019, Safety could certainly be up there. I mean, Malcolm Jenkins and Rodney McLeod, I'd be surprised if both of them were back in 2019 unless one's willing to take a pay cut. And then, so safety, defensive line, Chris Long's not going to be back in 2019. Michael Bennett might not be back in 2019. Brandon Graham might not be back in 2019. So, I mean, Haloti Ngata's not going to be back in 2019. Tim Jernigan might not be back in 2019. So there's a lot of guys that are going to be leaving this line. You're going to have Derek Barnett. You're going to have Josh Sweat. You're going to have Fletcher Cox. But unless I'm missing some off the top of my head there, I mean, you're losing a lot of these pieces. So I do think that defensive line is a position where wouldn't surprise me if honestly the Eagles use their first pick on defensive line or 2 out of the first 3. I mean, the Eagles have $50 million invested in their defensive line for 2018. That's the 3rd most in the NFL. Howie shows he likes to save money at certain positions, but I think the defensive line is a position where they really like to invest, they value it, and I think that going forward, defensive line is one of their biggest needs. Obviously, quarterback is not, and people will say running back, but I don't think they'll ever value the running back position that much. Okay, here's one from a colleague. Go off football again. What's the best song among these new Chance? The Chance the Rapper just dropped 4 songs. What's the best one, and what do you think his best song is of all time? So if you're not into Chance, you're not into rap, I'm sorry. These next 2 minutes might not interest you, but if you are, I have been very skeptical of Chance over these past 2 years. I thought Coloring Book was one of the best albums, one of my favorite albums over the last few years. I mean, I thought it was an absolute classic. But since then, I haven't really been thrilled with what Chance has put out. I didn't like a lot of his features. Obviously, Ultralight Beam feature was great, but outside of that, every time Chance was on a song, I'd get excited, and then I'd listen, and it would be trash. So when he put these 4 songs out, I was skeptical, to say the least. I was hopeful, but skeptical, I would say, is the best way to describe my mood on those. But I actually ended up liking them a lot. I really like 65th and Ingleside. The beat on that is great. I thought it was a good combination of like his singing and his rapping. His verse at the end was really good. I really like I Might Need Security. Lyrically, that song is ridiculous. Not crazy with the chorus on that one. The beat's good. I just don't really like the chorus, but the lyrics, the verses on that's like classic Chance. That was Chance at his best, in my opinion. Really like those 2 songs. Best Chance song of all time, for me, it's Blessings off of Coloring Book. Just lyrically, he rips that. He just goes. The beat's ridiculous. Very kind of like peaceful, but also, definitely a bit of a bop. So I would say those are my favorite songs off the new Chance and some of the past stuff he's done. All right, let's see. All right, here's one. Instigator, and his picture is a gator. So I guess kind of clever and corny at the same time. I feel Michael Kendricks being released was a mistake. 1, because I feel he's very good because they lack depth. What say you? 2, I've read he had attitude and bad locker room guy, but when they trade for Ben on defensive line that has the same rep, please explain that in your view, please. So, first of all, not grammatically great Twitter, which tripped me up. I'm not one to talk, but come on, Instigator, come a little better next time. All right. Do I think releasing Kendricks was a mistake? I think linebacker depth is an issue for this team. I mean, Nigel Bradley won't play in game 1. Jordan Hicks, we've discussed his injury concerns. I think then you look at the rest of the guys like Corey Nelson, Camus Grugier-Hill, Nate Geary, Leroy Reynolds, Joe Walker. These are all just guys, and they're all the same type of guy. I think they're hoping that Nate Geary can step into Michael Kendricks' role as quick on the outside, athletic. Kendricks struggled in coverage towards the end. I think Nate Geary might have the ability to be a little better there because of his history at safety. I think they're very encouraged by what they've seen from him over the past year. So when you add in the finances of it, I think they saved $5 million. I wouldn't say it was a mistake, but I think it's one of the few moves Eagles made this offseason that wasn't a win now move. The linebackers are better with Michael Kendricks on it. There's no denying that. So I think in that way it was a mistake, but the money kind of factors in. He says he's ready. He has attitude and bad locker room guy, but that, from my experience, could not be further from the truth. Teammates love him. I thought he handled this whole situation over the past 2, maybe even 3 years, really, where they've kind of had him on the trade block. He's won it out really well. I mean, you consider how many contracts holdouts really, are as peaceful as the Kendricks one. I mean, once or twice maybe he said something that made it news, but never complained that much. And I think his teammates did really like him. And then, you talk about Bennett. Bennett, his only off-the-field thing, which isn't even off-the-field thing, but, people will obviously look at him, and he has strong views on certain things that a lot of NFL fans don't like to talk about. But I don't think that's going to be an issue in the Eagles locker room, because the Eagles are one of the most progressive, outspoken locker rooms in the NFL when it comes to social issues. So I don't think Bennett's going to be an issue, and I don't think Kendricks was either. But, it is good to hear Michael Kendricks' question. It seems every offseason we're answering those. All right. From JSH66. We know the Eagles are loaded with talent, but do you think they will be as focused and as ready to play as last season considering their Super Bowl championship? This is obviously in some ways the $1 million question here. That's the toughest part of repeating. I've never covered a Super Bowl team that's tried to repeat, but from everything you hear and read, and I talk to guys that have covered teams that won before, and that second season after they win is just different. Like, the vibe is different, and I think you pick up on that a little bit with the Eagles. Like, they have Super Bowl 52 paraphernalia all over the entire building, like in the locker room and all the meetings. Like, you cannot escape the fact that this team won the Super Bowl, and good for them. Like, maybe that's not how you handle it. The one thing though that makes this Eagles team so different is the quarterback. Like, Carson Wentz, like, he is this quarterback capable of winning you a Super Bowl, in my opinion. He's a quarterback capable of getting you to the Super Bowl. Like, I think even he knows deep down he can't say he's a Super Bowl winning quarterback. Like, he did not start in play and win a Super Bowl. Like, he just didn't. So I think that is going to be a huge motivating factor. And with how big the quarterback position is, like, I don't think that they're going to be complacent. And then you also factor in Jason Peters, Darren Sproles, guys like that. They're going to be coming back. Some of the new blood, Michael Bennett hasn't won in a while. I think that there's always a little bit of those issues, but because of how the Eagles are set up financially, like, there's not a ton of contracts disputes besides Brandon Graham, and he seems to have accepted that's not going to happen. I think that the Eagles, like, if they don't win, I don't think it'll be because they're complacent. Like, if they don't win, it'll just because it is really hard to win again. They do have injuries, like, stuff like that. Like, I don't think you're going to see an Eagles team. Oh man, look at this. My sound went off before it should have. So let me finish this one up, one or two more. But no, I don't think you're going to see this Eagles team deal with complacency just because of Carson Wentz. All right, last question I wanted to answer before we wrap this up is from Sean on Twitter. And he said, what would be your one tip of advice for an aspiring sports journalist? So it always feels weird when I get answered this question because I'm 30 years old. I have a lot of career goals still. I don't like to think that, I still have a lot I want to do. So it's weird for me to give someone advice, but it is a question I actually get tweeted at me a fair amount. People email me. People from Temple, #TempleMade, love Temple. So I'll answer it. The advice I gave to Sean when he asked me was just work harder than everyone else. And that sounds silly, but I think, like, in today's media landscape, like, you look at all the people that just laid off the New York Daily News, the Athletic website that's charging now, Philly.com has gone to a paywall. Like, so many different places are trying to figure out how to handle the changes in media. And I think that sometimes a result of that is, some journalists can get complacent and, like, feel like, all right, they've done it this way. They're going to stick to these journalistic integrities of how they've been doing it for 30 years. And I think, like, the integrity part of the game hasn't changed. Like, there's still certain ways you cover a team. I mean, there's ways you source things. There's the ways you deal with people. Those things don't change. But I do think one thing that has changed is, like, unless you're already Peter King or somebody like that, you can't survive as a sports journalist only writing 3 times a week. Like, you just won't have a big enough impact on your audience. So when I say my number one piece of advice is just to work harder, like, if you're listening to this podcast and you want to be a sports journalist and you've thought about starting a sports blog, like, I started my sports blog in 2008, and, it took me 8 years to get to covering the Eagles, 7 or 8 years to get to covering the Eagles full time, traveling to all the games. So in between then, I wrote 500 articles a year. Like, that's just how you do it. Like, people aren't going to agree with what you write every time. People might not like certain things you write. But if you're always there and you're always working hard and you're always available, like if something happens, you're available with your take right away. Then once you're lucky enough to get access to a locker room, get to know the players, get stuff no one else has. Like, don't write the same story everyone else is writing. You can always tell when you're in a locker room what everyone else is going to write, right? Like whether that's, Jay Ajayi fumbles the ball and everyone's writing, let's get Jay Ajayi to talk about fumbling the ball. Like, if everyone else is writing it, you're not going to stick out. And people will hear me say that and say, oh, that's because you only like hot takes. No, I just like writing stuff other people aren't writing in place you can't read elsewhere. I'm lucky enough to cover a team that has a ton of talented beat writers. Like, I've been to league events. I've seen other beat writers. No shots at them, but the Eagles have the most talented beat writing group in the NFL. Like, every day is competitive. And to stick out, you have to work really hard and you have to bring stuff that no one else does. Then obviously breaking news is extremely important. There's tons of people out there with takes. I'm one of them. I break news too. Like, that's just a fact. So you have to break news, you have to work hard, and you have to bring stuff no one else does. So that isn't one tip of advice, but would be my advice for an aspiring sports journalist. And it's actually a topic I really enjoy talking about. So thank you for asking me that question. All right, speaking of working hard, I will wrap up my first podcast by myself like this. So I've done emergency pods before, but I've never gone 40 minutes by myself. So I hope that you guys enjoyed it. I miss Zach. I think you guys probably miss Zach a little too. I'm excited Zach will be back on the next one, but it was nice to just kind of, have the mic here, talk about the Eagles, and answer your guys' questions. So it's something I want to do, hopefully once a week during the season, maybe a little more, a little less, depending schedule dictates. But, as I said at the beginning in the intro, if you liked what you heard, please leave a comment. On this one, I would appreciate the feedback a lot. Like, even if it's negative, give me some advice on how you think it went. And for the next one, I'll take that advice, I'll listen to it, and if you ask a question you want answered, I'll absolutely answer it. So thanks, everyone, for listening, and me and Zach will be back later this week with our first podcast from Eagles Training Camp.